Today's project, I'm going to try and repair this hydraulic cylinder out of my 10-ton floor jack. The issue is that the jack won't hold its position, it gradually creeps down. The controls at this end, this connects to the handle on the pump and extends the jack, and this one releases the pressure and allows it to come down. I'm not sure how to get it apart. There's a nut at this end which I'm going to attempt to remove, and it seems to split at this point. That all seems to be one piece. I don't have a spanner big enough for this nut. I've got a slogging spanner, but even that's too small, so I'm going to attempt to adapt something for that job. The first step is to drain the oil, and for that it's probably easiest to remove this access panel. You just leave that draining there for a short time. The next step is to remove the connection for this return line. I'm really not sure how to get this apart, but when I see this big nut on the end, I assume that that's going to unscrew something. Now I don't have a vise big enough to hold this in place, so I've made this bracket and I'm going to bolt it to the floor to hold it still. Now that I've got it locked down on the floor with this bracket, the only tool I got big enough to fit is the Stilsons. It'll allow me to spin this off. I've decided to take everything apart at this end, because when I undo the other end, it's going to twist this tube out. So I think this end needs to come off first. Inside the jack there's a nut that I think has to come off, and then this tube, it's got a hex on it, but really no room to put a spanner on that. I think that it might just pull out through the back of the case, but the difficulty is going to be to get this nut out. Well, this nut, not easy to see, but I think that there's a crimp on the thread to stop it coming undone. So I've put it back into my clamp, and I'm going to have to put a bit more weight on it because it won't hold it firmly enough in my vise. Let's see if this works. Yes. No. I think I've just about got it. See if we can avoid dropping the whole lot. It's a bit of a mess. Done some damage to the thread, or is that Loctite? No, it might be Loctite. There's a number of spots on the thread that have been crimped to stop it screwing itself out. So that's why it was so hard to remove. At this stage, I think that the end piece will tap off. I could probably even use my rubber hammer. Ooh, more oil draining out, but that's got that off. Now the end cap should just screw off. It's going to be a bit of a process to reposition the winch. It's probably loose enough now. Oh, more oil going everywhere. Whoop. And it looks like there's a big chunk of the seal missing, which is probably why it didn't stay up. So here's the piston, and there's a big chunk of the seal missing. So next job is to try and replace that seal. Now I'll see if I can get this seal off here. It's coming apart. I guess this floor jack is 30 years old or more, so I guess it's not surprising that over a period of time the seals would deteriorate. I managed to get a replacement seal, it wasn't that easy to find. I started with my regular bearing supplier, and he said that the size was just totally outside the range that they carry. So I went to a hydraulic supplier and they referred me to Amando, and the very helpful chap there said, yeah, I got one of those. It took him about 20 minutes to find it, but hopefully it's going to do the trick. So what I've got to do now is put this seal onto here. It's a pretty tight fit. I've got to try and do it without damaging anything. I think that's just about right. So I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on this and try and get the seal to bed in. You can see it on one side but not the other. I've got to be careful I don't curl the lip of the seal. There we are. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? I can hear it pushing air out into the reservoir chamber. So now I'm going to try and put it all back together, and I've realised that the back part of the jack really needn't have been taken out to get at the main seal. Just put that in to hold it in place. I've got the shaft in now, and I just have to tension these two nuts. This chamber at the back of the jack is in effect the reservoir. And the oil is held in here and it's pumped into the main part of the cylinder, and then when the cylinder retracts, the oil flows back into here. So here's the base, the trolley for the jack, and the trick with this part is remembering how it all goes back together. So the hydraulic cylinder sits in this hole here and then pushes on this here, but if I put it in first, these return springs have to attach there. It's going to be too hard to get it in once the cylinder's in place, so I'll try and get that in first. Just get something to pull on the spring to try and hook it on to here. That's it.
That is up.
There's a bolt here that goes into this indent here, so before I put it in I'm going to have to rotate the piston so that that hole is at the top. This is a 16mm bolt that screws down into the shaft, I think. Now these shoulders here need to go into those holes there. So if I lift the jack up and pull the whole thing forward to a point where hopefully they'll line up. There's two bolts that hold the plates together, one here and one up here. Just need to force this together so I can get the bolt started. Just tighten up these two bolts. There's two linkages to reconnect. This one goes onto the pump and this one is the release to let the jack down. There's also a spring that goes in here, and I've got to try and remember where that goes. We'll start with the bottom linkage, I think. This is the return spring for the foot lever as opposed to the handle, and it goes from here on to through to here. So the reservoir has to contain enough oil that when the jack goes to its full extent, it's still covering the pump. So just pumping it up. Not a fast action, and when it's at its full extent, the pump, which is the silver bit on the away from the camera, and then when I let it down, the jack goes down and the oil returns to the reservoir, and there's still a fair bit of air in the oil, but a few applications should get rid of that. And the jack's right down. And that's about all there is.